Well, I might as well make part two. Like I said, I initially recorded a whole bit of what I did, but it was way too long, and I did not like how it came out. So in part two, I'm just going to more or less summarize what I did, try and show what I want without completely taking the thing apart. Because let's be fair, taking this thing apart again for the 7th time would be a massive pain in the butt. At the very least, I'm going to pop off the motherboard and show you what I did to that. And once I get all that done and whatnot, then I'll actually show you this thing running and whatnot. So let me actually go and pop this thing apart and come back. And of course, here is the motherboard for the Mac Mini. It's fairly small and compact. So obviously when I got this thing, I took it all apart, I de-dusted it. There was a nice little dust bunny right around there or so. But the actual board itself was fairly clean. This thing was used, but it seems to have been fairly well taken care of. Obviously, the thermal paste on the i5 processor was long since dead, so I reapplied some thermal paste. And give me a second to actually try and get the camera to show what I want to show. There you can see the copper core right there, the heatsink. That makes direct contact to the processor die. And then you see a small little thing right over there. That I added myself. That is right over the GPU die. For some reason or another, Apple, when they designed this thing, they did not design any way for the GPU on this thing to cool itself. So I took a small little dab of thermal paste, and then I put a little thermal pad on top of the thermal paste. That way, so the GPU die can make contact to the actual heatsink of the Mac Mini and whatnot. And in doing that, it actually has improved the actual performance of this Mac Mini. Even though this Mac Mini is using a 1TB 5200 RPM hard drive, I definitely do notice a major difference in just general day-to-day usage and actually like gaming like Minecraft and whatnot. The thing actually maintains its temperatures a lot more better after reapplying thermal paste to the actual processor itself, and of course doing that little mod to the GPU. Those two simple little things have significantly improved this thing's performance. But then again, this is just the base model, so this thing is limited to be quite frank, with 4 gigs of RAM. If I had the option to buy the 8 gig variant for around the same price, I would have done it. But to get an 8 gig version of this Mac Mini, it will cost like $200 when the base model is like $140. And considering I initially bought this thing as a streaming device, it more than does its job. But I actually got myself a Google Chromecast because this thing is nice, but the Google Chromecast with the Google TV seems to be a lot more nicer and a lot more easier to work with. So with that said, I'm actually going to figure out ways to actually where I can integrate this into my actual computer setup and actually use this thing as my secondary desktop to my secondary desktop. As you can see, here's my main secondary, which is currently plugged in and turned on. I'm actually thinking of having this Mac right here on top of my desktop, and then just get a nice long like 8-foot to 9-foot cable and just stream that cable all the way down to the monitor here, and then just have it to where if I want to use the Mac Mini, I just turn the Mac Mini on and I just swap to the proper inputs, or I just turn this secondary computer off and then I just turn this one on and the monitor will just automatically swap to the other input. But for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this thing back together, and I'm going to actually use my main desktop here, or my main display here, because it's a nice 1080p IPS, and show you what else I've done to this Mac Mini, which really isn't much. But someone asked for part 2, and I might as well do part 2. Alright, and before I close this thing up, I need to do the Lewis-Rossman method and make sure I got Fanspin, because if I do, I know this thing's going to be working properly. And we got Fanspin, which means when I go to fully get this thing closed up and whatnot, I should be able to boot right into macOS and continue on with this video. Also, let's be fair, I accidentally forgot to plug in the actual fan cable in properly, or I didn't seat it properly the first time, and the thing was kind of overheating. So with that said, now I'm going to put this whole thing back together and get all set up and come back. Here's the Chromecast with Google TV that I was talking about. It's behind my TV. I tried to make it to where the cable isn't completely just bent out of whack. I really do not like how they design the stupid little puck. I would personally like to have a little HDMI port on the actual puck itself instead of just this ribbon cable, but what you gonna do? I'm using the USB-C cable from my LG V40 to power it because the cable this thing came with is longer and nicer, and the LG cable's kind of old, so I wanted to replace that USB-C cable for a long time. And of course, here's the TV I'm using. It's I think I stated it before in previous, like a video long time ago, that this is a $35 TV that's 1080p that I got from Goodwill. But since it's one of those older TVs, it has one of those little issues to where it overscans. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to get the Google Chromecast, or the little Chromecast thing, instead of using the Apple TV, because every single time I want to turn this TV on, I have to go into the sub menu and turn the aspect ratio to full native, that way so it doesn't overscan. Even with the Google TV, or even with the Chromecast, it does overscan, but overscans in a way to where it's not going to obstruct me from actually using and seeing the picture and whatnot. So with that out of the way, let's boot up the Mac Mini and see what happens. Alright, we've checked for Fanspin, so like I said earlier, theoretically this thing should boot up without a problem. Did I not plug it in the bottom? I think I did plug it in. I did not. I'm an idiot. I'm keeping this in because I want to keep my videos somewhat interesting. I just did the PC equivalent of forgetting to flip the on button on the PSU of a gaming rig you just made. So with that said, we'll now turn on. Yes. And I get the little chime. And it should now boot to, there it goes. And since I'm using a hard drive instead of an SSD, it'll take a little bit to boot up, so I'll come back. Alright, and the Mac Mini is now booted up, and on this panel, macOS looks fantastic. The actual UI that makes up macOS and whatnot, it just puts Windows to shame with how good macOS actually looks. But with that said, there's really nothing else I can really show when it comes to at least macOS on this Mac Mini, because, well, I've never really used macOS, and as we all know, I'm a Windows user. But as you can tell, I did boot camp it, so I can boot into Windows whenever I want. Another thing I did is I went to my local Walmart and I got myself a keyboard mouse combo set that's on branded for about 17 bucks. And overall, this little keyboard mouse combo kit is really nice. The original keyboard mouse I was using on this thing was on its way out, so for 17 bucks, these are a nice pair of replacements. Now, you can definitely tell they're $17, but then again, this is still a good set of keyboard and mouse if you're on a budget. At least for me. Obviously, I'm not going to be doing any gaming on my Mac Mini, so I don't need anything too precise. So for the time being, this will do the job just fine. The only gripe I have is with the mouse. The buttons are just a tad bit more noisier than I would like. But luckily, due to the way they designed this thing, give me a second. You pop that off, you can get to the batteries and whatnot, and as you can see right there, those are the two triggers. It's just using standard triggers that any old mouse use. So I can actually swap these out for some quieter triggers down the road if these really start to bug me. And knowing me, the noise these things are going to make is going to bug me. So I'm eventually going to swap these triggers out. I just don't know when. If I do, I'll probably have a video up of me trying to do that. But for right now, I'm going to keep the mouse as is. Because again, this is for my Mac Mini and I don't need anything too fancy for it. Obviously, I do want to get a proper keyboard mouse set from Apple for this thing. But to get that, it's like $150 something. So I gotta figure something out. Maybe I can get lucky from my local Goodwill again and find a wireless keyboard or mouse for like $5 each. But what will most likely end up happening is I'll end up buying a set off of eBay for like $50 to $60. But for the time being, again, the keyboard mouse I'm using will do the job just fine. And of course, I probably have an issue with my Apple ID, so let me go and resolve that issue. Nothing like good old Apple security theater bullshit. Unnecessary security that is absolutely unnecessary and really fucking annoying. That's the one thing I despise about Apple next to their stance on repairs. Their security theater bullshit is absolute fucking cancer. And now I should boot into Windows 10. I actually tried getting Windows 11 to install on this thing, but Microsoft actually went into the Windows 10 installation deal and made it so it can register the fact you changed something. So with that said, I'll eventually get Windows 11 on this thing just to spite them. But for right now, I'm just using Windows 10 because I spent a good week trying to get this thing back up and running again. And I really don't want to screw this thing up for a while. So with that said, I'll come back when Windows 10 boots up. Just to let you know that if you hear my printer making a bunch of rackets, I got myself a new set of printer ink, so it's currently bitching about it and whatnot, but it might make some noise here and there throughout the last bit of this video. And here's Windows 10 running on my Mac Mini, and I mean, that's Windows 10. What else is there to say? You can definitely tell it's running on the Mac Mini because it took a while for it to register right click and whatnot, but again, for 140 bucks, I'm more than impressed with this little Mac Mini. And if I go to here, you can see how I have my, so you can see how I have everything partitioned. I'm using 1 terabyte drive, and I gave 700 gigs free to Windows 7, and I have about maybe 300 or so free for Mac OS or something like that. Because mainly I'll be using Windows on this thing still. I don't know if I'll actually be utilizing Mac as much as I think I will, but if I do, I can easily remove this Windows 10 partition and just open up the hard drive on the Mac Mini. I guess the last thing I want to do is maybe show Minecraft and Genshin Impact running on this thing, so I guess Minecraft first. Alright, so obviously I'm playing on an Anarchy server. I'm playing on 2B2T's testing server for a 16.5 or whatever it's called, and as you can tell, it is fairly playable. But it's constantly chugging here and there because it has to load in the new chunks and whatnot, and since I don't have a SSD on this thing, well, goodbye where I was at. Well, if you're seeing this video, you got free shit right there you can go to, I guess. Fuck me. Well, back to spawn I go. If anything, the leads I lost, those are probably the most valuable thing I actually had on my person. Kind of fucking sucks I didn't put them on each chest when I had a chance, but whatever. Actually, to be fair, I'm actually going to go back to the cores and actually get those things back. But if you're watching this video, you might get on the 2B2T and I guess start a base with me or something, I don't know, or the test server, be my guest. I'm going to be more or less at the cores I was at, and I'll be building something, I don't know what. But this is 2B2T's testing server, so if you actually do anything around where I'm at, just know that it's not going to be for long, and this is the test server, so it will eventually be erased. But with that said, as you can tell, Minecraft is more than playable on this thing. Granted, I've got this fully set up Impact and whatnot, but I'll be doing that all off camera and whatnot because I don't want to bore you any more than I already have. So with that said, let me get Genshin Impact up and running and on the video. Also to note that when it comes to Minecraft running on this thing, I'm running it at 1080p. But just because Minecraft at 1080p can run just fine, that doesn't mean Genshin won't. So let me load up Genshin and come back. Now with Genshin Impact, it takes a little while to load. It doesn't help that this is again the base model of the Mac Mini and it has a spinning hard drive. If you're going to get a Mac Mini, I would suggest shelling out the extra like $50 and getting a version that has 8 gigs of RAM and most likely the Iris graphics. Now with that said, I'm pretty certain this thing had 8 gigs of RAM instead of 4. Even with the current i5, this thing will probably actually be able to handle these games. I thought I had a lot more better because again, I'll have 8 gigs instead of 4, but even with 4 gigs, it kind of runs Genshin Impact fairly fine. It does occasionally glitch here and there. Let's see. Let's go and attack these things over here again. Or at least I'm going to. Whatever, I don't know. Alright, so here's Genshin Impact I got running on the Mac Mini. It kind of looks like ass up close. But here's the kicker. I'm actually playing this at 4K. Granted 60% of 4K, but 4K nonetheless. Now normally I would actually want to play at 1080p, but as you can tell, it'll only being windowed. If I want to go full screen, I have to be at 4K. So I'm playing at 60% resolution of 4K, and it's kind of playable to an extent. If this was my only computer to play Genshin Impact on, this, for me at least, is more than playable. Now obviously when you go to attack something, there is the occasional frame game freezing and whatnot, and that's due to the fact it's using a hard drive and not a SSD and whatnot. But with that said, again, if this is my only computer to run Genshin on, this will be more than playable for me. Obviously I'll try to play it at 1080p instead of 4K, but again, this is, for me at least, more than playable. Now, just for shits and giggles, let's see what happens when I actually bump it to native 4K in the actual rendering render resolution. No, not 1.1, 4K. And as you can tell, the frame rate definitely dies.
There'll be plenty of time for work later.
If I could figure out how to mute the game with this keyboard and mouse I have, I would do that, but whatever. And surprisingly, the frame rate, it does die, but it doesn't go to like 2 frames a second. It's like maybe 10 to 15, which again, for a game like this, is not playable by any stretch of the imagination. But the fact is, even playing it at this frame rate at 1080, not 1080, but 4K, is very surprising. Now, can you please kill this thing? I suck. What's the stab girl again? This one? You can tell I don't play this game that often. Technically speaking, if you're just shitting around in the overworld instead of doing quests and whatnot, even this can technically be playable. But if you're actually doing quest shit and whatnot that requires precision, obviously this frame rate is not playable. But let's be fair, the fact this Mac Mini, this base model Mac Mini is running Genshin Impact at 4K lowest is very surprising. But again, for even more shits and giggles, let's see what happens if I go back to render resolution and go to 1.5 of 4K. Okay, and this is where I was thinking the frame rate would just die. This is the frame rate I would actually think I would be getting if I was running it at actual 4K. But surprisingly, running it at actual 4K yields better frame rate. So with that said, obviously again, if this Mac Mini was my only computer to run Genshin on, I'd run it at this setting. But again, this isn't the actual main computer I have for this game here. I have my main rig and my secondary, which run this game significantly more better. But I just wanted to include this game just for the shits and giggles and just to see if I can kind of push this Mac Mini more than it really needs to be pushed. So with that said, I guess that pretty much sums up part 2 of this video. With that said, I got some printer ink and my Tanka is all been set up and ready to go. So I'm going to start the process of getting her all pieced together and Pepakura and print out the pieces and start building her and whatnot.